Well, we're live. No intro for this one. This one's been 3 years in the making. This is Drako. We met in Tanzania 3 years ago with the Hadza, the Maasai. It was epic, and now we're finally doing a podcast. Welcome.
Thanks, man. No, it's good to be here. I mean, wow, it's been a long time coming. 3 years.
3 years. We're here at the Sapien Center. We're in Austin. We're doing this live. Watch it on YouTube. We got our 3-camera setup. We're doing it professionally for this big podcast. This one is huge. I always probably say that this is one of the best podcasts I'm going to do, but I think this is one of the best podcasts we're going to do because we have some big insight. And we've been thinking about this really for 3 years. We got a lot of insight. You got a lot of insight from traveling around the world. So when we met in Tanzania, that was part of a 180 city tour that you were doing.
Yeah, that's right. As my partner, Mary, we'd started to travel all around the world to go and have a look at these traditional communities and to see like what was it that people were doing, like what were they eating, to find out what would make people thrive. And it was just such a combination of factors, and no one got it all right, correct. You know, no one had it perfect, but we could see all of the factors in different places that they did do right. Sometimes it was community, sometimes it was the food was amazing, sometimes it was just like the fact that they were outdoors a lot, you know. So, you know, many different factors, and then you start to get a picture that emerges. And I think, you know, you've had the same experience, you know, with your own travels, your own discussions with doctors and nutritionists and anthropologists and so forth. Very similar, right?
Well, that's my whole goal. It's like, what is Food Lies, the series, and what's my whole goal in life? It's to figure out how do we have the longest health span? How do we maybe change the way we're living? And so what we're talking about today, we actually, along the way, we've kind of teamed up on this Sapien mission, which is really a movement. And it's about how do we thrive as humans? And we can look to the past and gain a lot of insight. And that's why we travel around the world and look at what these cultures do. But just because they do it doesn't mean it's correct. So we always check things with modern science. And a thing we always say is camp, no camp, which is the camp that we're in, which is kind of funny because it is a camp. But it's the best camp to be in because we're not going to get stuck in a dogma. We're not going to get stuck in paleo. And just because paleo did it, our Paleolithic ancestors did it, means it's correct, right? People say, oh, well, they didn't have raw milk back then, so why do you guys drink raw milk? We're like, well, what's a perfectly good, nutritious food that helps people thrive? So why should we throw it out just because supposedly we didn't do it back then?
Yeah, just because it was done ages ago. What I also realized, just because it was done by a traditional community does not make it right. Yeah. And then me and you really connected on finding the closer truth. And we've found some amazing stuff, right? Like we're starting to learn a lot more about where human thriving comes from and what to trim away from even the ancestral way of life that doesn't serve us, right? So I guess that's where we really connected. And that's what we made the Sapien Center as well. And, you know, built up this community here and really started to apply it to our own lives too, right?
Yeah. And the closer truth is something that guides us because no one's going to have it all figured out. And as long as you're just not stuck in your camp and think that you have it figured out, you're always going to be working towards something and learning. And so we might piss people off in this episode. We might sort of go against some of the things that even the people that agree with us think that we're going to say. So there's just no sacred cows. You don't want to hold these sacred cows where you think that we have to appease everyone or hold these beliefs forever.
We don't want to be arrogant. We don't want to say, oh, we absolutely have the answers. In fact, that's the whole point of the closer truth. Why we say it's a closer truth is because it's not an absolute truth. So people will, like, say, come across a diet that served them well, right, as a healing modality. So they'll say, oh, well, I went keto or I went carnivore and look what it did. My inflammation went down. I have a skin condition that went away, or, you know, my gut repaired itself, or I got my energy back. They have all these things. And they find that this healing modality becomes for them the answer. And then of course there's a community there that is ready to, like, you know, take you in. And if you say the wrong things, you know, you're a heretic and then you get ejected, you know. So we want to make sure that I think this whole concept of Sapien, the principles of Sapien, is like a living body of knowledge. Like if something comes along, and that's what me and you really have connected on, if something comes along and it's a better, closer truth, then we just adopt it. There's nothing, you know, holding us back, right?
You have to swallow your pride a little bit. And then sometimes it takes a little while because I did do the keto thing for a long time, right? And then I started waking up in the middle of the night and I started having cold hands and feet. Oh. And, you know, I had all these little things.
I was worse than you. I was a vegan.
Well, a lot of people come from the plant-based world. You know, they go on their journey. But still, you swallow your pride a little bit and you reevaluate and then you get to the closer truth. So we should zoom out, though. We got to zoom out. to the situation we're in, right? 88 to 93% of the population in the US is metabolically unhealthy, depending on what studies you look at. Like, how did we get here? So I'd really like to zoom out and think what happened and what about modern society is driving all this?
I think we've got to look at, like, the most obvious thing, I guess, is commerce, right? Food of commerce just happens not to be the food of health. And we talk about that a lot, right? That you go and you want to make a business. Well, you want people to, like, for example, if you're looking at nutrition, you want people to compulsively eat your food. You also want to make it as cheap as it possibly can be made and be, stored for as long as possible and so on. And some of those tribal communities that we went out to explore, for example, the Hadza, which is where we met, right? We met exploring the Hadza. It was quite a cool story because also there was Paul Saladino and Anthony Gustin. They'd come along as well. We met them. However, unfortunately, I think they poisoned themselves on some berries along the way.
They got there a little earlier than us. We planned this whole 17-day trip. They got poisoned by the berries. They saw the Hadza eating a little bit, and I think they ate the whole bush. And so they actually had to leave early. So we did the trip without them.
Yeah, well, I mean, these guys don't have a pantry. When very graciously they let us go hunting with them because we'd already spoiled their game.
Holding them back. Really.
Holding them back, yeah. Like we're tramping through the bush and trying to survive. And these guys, if they saw an animal, if they saw anything, like, it was food. Right?
It was food. Like, we didn't even see it. I didn't even see what they were doing. And then, boom, it's like this tiny little animal in the tree, and they just got it.
It was food. And then they would start a fire in like 2 minutes. Like, really wild, unbelievable.
But you know what's great too? The other tribe, Maasai, that we went to see, and the old man Clemens. Remember Clemens?
Oh yes, Clemens.
So we were talking about the shelf-stable foods, processed foods, and commerce. And these guys, his grandpa or his dad, he was saying how he lived to about 100, and now each generation is dying sooner and sooner. And I remember asking him the questions about vegetable oil, or we're asking him about food, and he said, I don't trust the foods that have too long a shelf life.
Yeah.
He just knew. He's like, I don't want these foods, but these new foods are coming in, and they have the corn, the maize flour coming in. Instinctively know that these foods are not right if they can sit on a shelf for 5 years.
Yeah, they actually weren't even looking at, like, nutrition. They don't have these words, right? They weren't like, oh, is this nutrient dense? Is this plant-based? Whatever. They were just like, it lasts on a shelf. Like, it can last for a while, and we're not interested if it's not absolutely fresh. There was like blood, milk, meat, and an interesting a stew that we had to sample made from all these intestines that they call tea, and literally no dessert, right?
Oh, no salts either. They're very interesting how they don't even need salt. But mainly what we learn from them is they have the correct instincts, and we've lost our instincts. And I don't want to jump around too much. We got to just back to the commerce side. So where have we gotten with the incentives being so misaligned with the food of commerce is the opposite of the food of health.
Yeah, well, so if you're going to engineer a food product and you want that food product to sell well and on an ongoing basis to your customers, you've got to make sure that that the customer is compelled to buy it over and over again. You want to make sure that it's cheap to make as well, and then that it can be stored and transported and so forth, right? Now, when you think about every single food that's good for you, none of these criteria are met, the commercial criteria. Like you yourself started the nose to tail business, right? And nose to tail is basically the most amazing meat that you managed to find. You went and handpicked these ranches, as Jessica and Austin and in Lubbock. Those guys do it right? It's pasture raised. You've got like 100 different species of grasses and things that they eat. But the profit margins were just slight because all you're doing is taking the animal, you're processing it, you're killing it, cutting it up, and then that's it. That's your value add, and then you're sending it to the consumer. But when you think about foods of commerce, you can take a milled powder, your wheat or some other soy thing, and then you can take a vegetable oil, something very cheap, and then you can combine them together, put them in a different shape, make all sorts of cereals and biscuits and crackers and all that middle aisle stuff, and you've added value, right? The product itself has cost pennies to make, but you sell it for dollars, and it's devoid of nutrients. It can have an extremely long shelf life, but it's not anything that's going to give you the nutrients you need, right? And that's just the opposite.
So the story here is that for food manufacturers, they have no incentive to make a food healthy.
Absolutely
They
not.
actually have an incentive to make it unhealthy. So this is what we talk about a lot, is the nutrient density, right? Nutrient density is going to come up a lot. And the best way to get someone to overeat a food is to have the lowest nutrient density, because then your body is not getting what it needs, so it will keep eating, expecting to get nutrition. And I did a podcast with Mark Schatzker, who wrote The Dorito Effect, but there's a lot more to it beyond just that. So maybe you can go into that.
Yeah, we talked about hyper-palatability, and I think that takes it to a certain point. But you see, nutrient-dense foods are very palatable. They're as palatable as the hyper-palatable foods, right?
Steak is delicious. You cook it correctly.
Unbelievable, right?
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Barbecue, Texas barbecue is my favorite food.
Yeah.
I just can't, get enough of it. But the thing is, say with something like Doritos, these are an engineered product using our own senses, the hijacking of these senses that we have that compel us to eat food. So, when you are out in the field, let's say, from an evolutionary perspective, right? If you're out in the field and you've found some food thing that you put into your mouth, you can't wait for your stomach or your gut to digest it to find out whether there's nutrients. So we're taking these like signals from the free glutamic acid, from these ribonucleotides, from the salt content and so on. We're taking these signals that tell us, oh, this food is nutrient dense, this food is good, eat more of it, right? And we've just taken just the signal part, and we've made these agents, these flavoring agents that we just sprinkle on top of nutrient devoid food, that is, say, just corn flour fried in some vegetable oil. But we are telling our body, through our sensory mechanism, we're telling our body, oh, this has got lots of nutrients, eat it quickly. And you're getting pleasure from every bite. But there's actually a secondary satiety mechanism that kicks in, right? And that is like when the nutrients start to come into your body. You have, for example, your duodenum, you have that upper part just past your stomach has got these K cells, and they will generate satiety signals to lower your satiety. And therefore, if you compare eating something that's nutrient dense, over time, bite by bite, you're actually becoming more and more satiated right until the end of it, where the last bite is almost like a chore, right? You can't get through it quite yet. Whereas if you are looking at something like a corn chip that's got these flavoring agents on it, it's got no nutrients, that will never activate that secondary satiety mechanism. And what that means is the pleasure in every bite's very high, because every bite is like the first bite.
It's the same. Yeah. So you go through the meal, and with these Doritos, you never get satiated. The pleasure's always
Pure
the same.
pleasure.
You go through a steak, it's absolutely delicious. That's what we're saying. To me, it's hyper-palatable. A steak is hyper-palatable, but then it lowers off as you go, because your body has the secondary satiety sensing mechanism. You feel like you're full. I would say, okay, if someone offered me another steak after I ate a big 20-ounce steak, I'd be like, well, no, I don't need that. But if someone offered you another bag of chips, you could keep going.
No, you save that steak for tomorrow, right? Because you don't
Exactly.
need
I'd
it until
save
tomorrow.
Yeah.
You wouldn't even, it can keep you satiated for a very long time. But what it doesn't do is compel you again to eat more of that. You're not going for the pleasure. This is the compulsion. And the compulsion is a very commercial driver, right? If you can get people to be compelled to eat your food, to open the next bag of Doritos, poor Doritos, they get this all the time. But, there's just no end to it.
Yeah. And so that's why this is a side point, is why I push back on people just blaming it on hyperpalatability. A lot of people are just like, oh, processed foods are bad because they're hyperpalatable. But I'm saying a steak is hyperpalatable. Any meal that I make is hyperpalatable. But that's not a problem, because I eat a lot of it and then I don't eat again for a long time. And then I eat a lot of it and then I don't get to eat again for a long time. And it's perfectly fine, because the satiety matches the calories that it has. And this is what humans have always done. We've always eaten foods. They're whole foods. They're animal-based as a foundation. We ate. We're full for the right amount of time. Then you eat again. Now, all these modern foods, you eat them, you're not getting what you needed, and then you're going to eat again too soon.
Yes, but that's what they want, because if you eat again too soon, if you're compelled to eat, it's very good commercially. Compulsion is good for business. But I want to go back a bit on this. Is like the reason that me and you also connected on this is because we are both engineers, and we have this engineering thinking and systems thinking around how these things work, like how to engineer yourself a product that is very good commercially, and how it does differ from a food of health. The modern world is what it is, right? It's all about the choices that we make and where we spend our money. And a lot of this is to do with the awareness that people have of how damaging or not some of these foods are to our metabolism, to our health, to our, to the broader community. The choices are there to make, but those foods that are very healthy for us, tell us a little bit about what you learned about the price of the food, right?
Well, yeah,
compared to how healthy it is.
Well, this is where I'm saying how it's at odds, is that I started Nose to Tail because I was very into regenerative ag, and I thought this would be the best way to make a living. And I just had the podcast. I was making food lies. I was like, how do I want to make a living? I believe in this. Then I realized I can't make a living off it because there's no profit margin. And then I really learned the hard way of why the world is the way it is. It's because the cereal, all the processed foods, the box costs more than the cereal. And, you have a couple cents of cereal, a couple cents a box, and they sell it for $6. So then they have the money to do all the lobbying. They have the money to do all the studies that say that it's great for you, and they have the money to do all the marketing. So it's just a sad reality that the incentives are so misaligned. There's so much money in the processed food industry. I call it the profits in the processing. Right, that's where you're talking about the value add.
The value, they call it value added foods. I mean, let's not even get into like medicine, right? Like, and what that side of the whole equation goes, because obviously if the food makes you unhealthy, and then you have a pharmaceutical industry that's sitting there that is there to repress the symptoms of this food, and people will pay to repress those symptoms, and the whole thing is really a partnership between the two, big pharma, bbig food, that sustains the economy.
So we talk about this on every podcast, right? And it's just all the pills and procedures, allopathic medicine is just putting patches, and there's no money in fixing the root cause.
So, I mean, the other thing to go back to is like, how did we get here? And when we first met, I had a theory that I showed you around, why it was that we have such a huge population explosion, why the food has transformed itself into these kind of fake foods and commercial foods rather than foods of health, and maybe we should go a little bit into that.
Yeah.
So there's this concept of the biosphere. You can think of it, anything that was alive, anything that synthesizes proteins is part of the biosphere. And I'm going to go back into like looking at the root cause of how we got to the point where we have the population explosion, and then against that backdrop as well, how we got to the point where we have such terrible food, right, in terms of the commercial food, and therefore it's affected our health and led to these other offshoots like your pharmaceutical industry and so on that's taken a certain form. And I believe that it all started in 1915. Around 1915, you have this invention of what's called the Haber process. It was a man called Fritz Haber, and he did a very difficult thing, actually, which has never been done before in the history of the whole Earth. In the history of the Earth, this trick he invented has never, ever been done. It's just by humans, like coming along with our ingenuity and doing it. And what that is it was a mechanism to fix nitrogen out of the air. And by what I mean by that is nitrogen itself does not support life, right? It doesn't support many forms of life, right? It does definitely not support like mammalian life. It's just for us an inert gas, and but it's actually used in protein, right? Nitrogen, the element, is used in our proteins. So how does it get from the air into our proteins? Well, in nature, what happens is you have these rhizomes, you have these special termites, you have all sorts of these little fungi and things, and they're able to metabolize nitrogen directly and turn it into a soluble form that plants can use, right? It's slow as hell, right? Takes forever. Mm-hmm. It's why and also at the other side you have the protein and the nitrogen degrading and going back into gaseous nitrogen at the atmosphere. And so the biosphere has always been about the same size. It hasn't really grown for millennia, not even millennia, millions of years. It's stayed more or less static. And what we've done now, with this invention of the Haber process, is where we actually can fix nitrogen directly, synthetically, out of the air and pump it into the human biosphere. And this is done through the production of synthetic fertilizers through the Haber-Bosch process. And so we take something which for millions and millions of years has had its own homeostasis. It's has stayed the same size the whole way. And then suddenly within the space of not even 60, 70 years, we are now producing hundreds of millions of tons of this material, like it's in the form of fixed nitrogen, that gets pumped into the human biosphere. What's happened is that's resulted in a population explosion. It's resulted in two things, actually. around 50 to 70% of the nitrogen that's in the protein in anyone's body that lives, especially in urban areas, comes out of a factory that fixed it. It's wild.
Well, go more into this process. Is this how we get the NPK fertilizer?
That's right, yeah. So NPK is nitrophosphate, or where they have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And this can be, once you produce this fertilizer, it's just small amounts of phosphorus and potassium and large amounts of this ammonium nitrate. You throw it onto land that's not even arable, and you just have huge yields of plant material. And the other thing is that in this country, most of this yield doesn't go to feed humans directly. They actually use it to feed animals in feedlots. So we will, no matter what, get our protein. If you're eating industrial foods, meat or plants, you are going to be you're exposed to this industrial production, and your protein is going to come out of this factory and be incorporated to your body. Now, that fact may be not, particularly bad. I don't know. Like we also will discuss this decoupling from nature that results from it. But this feedstock, the ammonia, which is what the Haber-Bosch process produces, the feedstock for that requires hydrogen gas as well. And that hydrogen gas comes from what's called syngas, which is made from fossil fuels. It's made from natural gas and petroleum. So a huge portion of our energy budget, like that comes out of fossil fuels, is used for the production of food. And that has led to a population explosion. It's completely unsustainable, because when the oil runs out, basically, when the natural gas runs out, our food runs out in the current paradigm.
Because we're using the wrong paradigm. We're using this kind of fake fertilizer that's propping us up. So I did a podcast with Rob Tunks, this Australian farmer, and I had this big realization of when the population uptick went crazy. It's when we could sustain the world on whole foods pretty much for a long time. And then we invented this process, and processed foods became abundant. And now we could feed the population, a huge population, with all these fake foods. So it's like we have a fake fertilizer. So it's taking nitrogen out of the air and creating ammonia, and then that is going into the soil.
Actually, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Fritz Haber, who invented it. He's called the father of chemical weapons. He's the first person to develop and deploy chemical weapons in the First World War. So he wasn't like a nice guy, not that it matters, right? But he was a clever chap, and even Einstein gave him some props for inventing this Haber-Bosch process. And so basically, you take nitrogen out of the air, you take hydrogen, which you get from your fossil fuels, and then you, at 400 atmospheres with an iron catalyst, you get this equilibrium reaction, and basically ammonia comes out of that. Then you take the ammonia, you take a platinum rhodium catalyst at 850 degrees, and then you burn it in the presence of oxygen, if you like. It's just reacted in that catalyst, and you make nitric oxide. You react the same ammonia with the nitric oxide, and you get ammonium nitrate, which is a very unusual chemical, okay? Ammonium nitrate is actually life and death. Throw it on the ground and plants will grow. But it's also used to make high explosives, and it was used to fuel the First World War. People were also able to blow themselves up, and it was the reason that the First World War was able to be so extensive. So in the same invention, you have both life and death, which is really interesting. It's an interesting conjugate.
Yeah, that is. And so we supported this massive population boom that was never possible. We could never have done this throughout history. We could never have 8 billion people in the world until this was invented.
So if this happened 300 years in the future, then the modern world would exist 300 years from now. It's that simple. Like, the population explosion was due specifically to that invention coming at that time. You can imagine it as just amplifying the protein that is on Earth in humans.
Well, it's interesting because it could be thought of as a good thing or a bad thing, because we got this population explosion, and that led to the Industrial Revolution and all technology. And that's what you're saying is, whenever this happened, that's the only reason we have modern society. But then, so you could say, well, it fed humans and it's good and we need protein. And this could be a good thing, but then what are the negative consequences of our bodies being 70% fake nitrogen? Well, it's not fake, but it's
artificially fixed. So it's what we would say decoupled from nature. So if you were to zoom out on a human population growth curve, it's a wild looking thing. It actually looks like a hockey stick with a very long neck, right? So from like 2,000 years ago, there's about 300 million people, and it took like over 2,000 years to get to around 1 billion, right? But it's taken 100 years to go from around just under 2 billion to 8 billion, right? And that's it's solely because we have the ability to amplify the protein through the synthetic fixation of nitrogen from our atmosphere using fossil fuels. This explosion having gone to around 8 billion now, if and when, because it's more a case of when we run out of fossil fuels, we have better had thought of a better way to feed the population of Earth than just creating creating ammonia out of fossil fuels. If we haven't found something better than doing that, we'll have gotten to an unsustainable point, and I think it'll be a really disastrous consequences.
Well, but we're not at all for like depopulation or controlling any of this. We're talking about doing regenerative agriculture, changing our techniques so that we can support people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the thing, is to be aware of the issue, right? It's always good to be aware of the issue, really take it seriously. This is also something a little bit like the climate change, argument debate, right? Maybe these things in the long run is going to cause like very disastrous consequences, but people aren't really ready to react yet about this. So they could say, okay, that's true. Our food is coming from the fossil fuels. We're effectively eating the fossil fuels. When they run out, we will have some big problems. Let's kick the can down the road. By then, we'll have partied all our parties, spent the kids' inheritance. We won't even be here. So we don't care. But, it's pays to think about it. And it is something it's objectively true, right? It's not like if we did not have the ammonia, if we did not have that process, we would not have the modern world.
Mm-hmm. So we don't need to get into the whole regenerative agriculture thing. That's another podcast for another day. But the quick story is that we can do better, and we're not vegans, but we don't want animal suffering too, right? You can have it both ways, right? We can treat animals properly and still have our food and eat them.
When I become vegetarian, it was because I saw a film that was it's called Land of Hope and Glory. And it was basically showing industrial farming of animals, where they treat them like plastic parts, where it was just all feedlots. So you could see the animals were suffering, and I didn't want to have any part of it. So on that day, with my son, I actually just stopped eating meat. And I thought, you know what? The public narrative tells me, eat the rainbow. This is a great thing to do. Start eating plants. I thought, well, this is two birds with one stone, right? I could become healthier, and I could just not be a part of this whole industrial farming thing, which was terrible, because it really is. Objectively, it's not great. And we've subsequently learned that it's even worse than we think, right? Especially with the case of feedlot animals, and especially with studying a little bit more about regenerative agriculture, you start to learn that, oh golly, you really do want to only be eating the regenerative, the organic. You really want to make sure that you can get as coupled animals that are as coupled to nature as possible, because the alternative isn't good. There are differences, big differences that affect your health between feedlot animals, industrially farmed, and regenerative animals, right?
Well, Ben, that's my podcast with Dr. Stefan van Vliet, which I mention a lot, as he talks about the 50,000 compounds that are in meat, and that if these animals eat the diverse diet, you mentioned our regenerative ranchers at Nose to Tail have 100 different species about that the animals are eating, then they get the correct nutrients, and then eating them gives us those nutrients. And all those secondary compounds are things that we think that we need from getting plants. I'm not saying we don't need to eat plants. Eating plants is fine. We ate whole foods, but for all of history, we were eating the most nutrient dense meat that the animals got to choose out of hundreds of species out on open prairies and eat all these nutrients, and then we could eat their meat and get them.
Or even more so, that's bioavailable secondary metabolites and nutrients, right? So you have, if you're eating the meat, it's already been made bioavailable for you. So they're even better than eating plants. If you want to eat your vegetables, actually you're better off eating regenerative meat because you've got those compounds in there, all made bioavailable for you.
That was a big insight. Also, with Fred Provenza, I'm just going to keep shouting out podcasts that I've done so you can go back and listen to them. But Fred Provenza is another PhD that studies this, and Drako taught me this word, the zoopharmacognosy.
That's it.
And the animals know what they need, and this is how they become so nutrient dense for us to eat, is because they're eating the right things, getting the right nutrition, getting the secondary compounds. These are the flavonoids, carotenoids, all these things that we want from the plant kingdom. It's actually better to eat it through the animal. No, it's interesting because I don't want to be like the carnivore guys that are saying all plants are toxic, you're gonna die. But Drako has a point here that they have downsides to eating a lot of these plant foods.
Oh yeah,
especially these new cultivars we have.
I want to just go on what you were talking about, zoopharmacognosy.
Yeah.
Do you think humans don't have it? We have it too. Like we actually, if we have our body intuition intact and we are coupling to the types of foods that we like to eat in nature, we have exactly the same as what animals have. We've got all the same kind of organs and everything, and we do seek out those foods in line with our body intuition. Now that, in big cities and places that have industrial food, a lot of people have lost that. They have more compulsive type of intuition. The intuition of an alcoholic or a heroin addict type of thing, which is more like a compulsive thing. It's obviously not going to be good for you, but that's what's developed with these modern foods. Whereas we do have that zoopharmacognosy ourselves.
Well, yeah. So with pregnant women, sometimes this comes out, and so there's a big difference. So I would say what you're craving. If you're craving a real food, that means you actually need it. If you're craving a processed food, that just means you're addicted to processed foods, or you just want this pleasure. So it's like sometimes with pregnant women, they crave liver, or they want to eat these strange things. So maybe you could go into more into that.
Well, they think it's strange, but what's happened is that it amplifies when you're pregnant. It will amplify your needs, if you like, so that you seek those things out. I think that a woman that when they become pregnant have this heightened sense of zoopharmacognosy, and they will seek out these things where they feel that they need them or they're missing them from their diet. And sometimes it's in line with correct body intuition, in which case they're going to be eating herrings and strawberries. And in some other cases, it might be pickles and ice cream or just starchy things and bags of crisps, in which case it's more like amplified the compulsion.
Yeah. So the Whole Foods herring or sardines, or I hear people eat these random things and they don't get it, and their doctors don't tell them why, unless they have a good functional medicine doctor who said, yes, you're craving liver for a reason. All of our ancestors prized liver and gave it to pregnant women and saved it for them because they knew how nutrient dense it was.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to go back to the animal side of things, like if you have got a feedlot animal, you just put it into so it's like a feedlot stage. That thing is trapped. It can't go and exercise its zoopharmacognosy. It's known, scientifically proven, right? Its cortisol levels are up, blood sugar is out of control, visceral fat ends up like developing as well, which from a culinary perspective is prized.
Oh, it's marbled meat. You want
marbled
that
meat, right?
Yeah.
But that comes from a sick animal, and the milk comes from a sick animal, and the meat comes from a sick animal. That is the fatty acid profile is different, the protein profile is different. You are actually causing the animal suffering, even just holding it still and stopping it from going to exercise that. We can talk about these sort of factors and when we talk about when we have a deeper conversation about the regenerative agriculture side of things. I mean, why that's so important, why the coupling is so important to nature.
So I don't want to jump around. We're kind of talking a mile a minute. I love it. We're so excited about this stuff. People love when Drako or I get excited about things and we do some diatribes and some lectures and some.
For you, it's been a decade. For me, it's been 7 years, and you've just been studying this and just coming up with the insight after insight. And it's interesting because they feed on themselves, right? Insights actually feed on themselves, and you start to connect the dots. And I think we've come up with I guess it is a closer truth, really, to what's kind of out there. A lot of people have components of some of these insights, but they're not really tying them all together, or it will sit on a particular ideology, like, you're carnivore, you're vegan, and they'll fight each other.
That's what we're trying to find. Is it's kind of the theory of everything. I've always tried to find like the theory of everything when it comes to nutrition, right? Einstein did the E equals MC squared. But I'm like, is there EMC equals MC squared for health? And that's what we're after. So far, we were talking about why the world is the way it is. Why are about 90% of people metabolically unwell? And then we started talking about, the processed foods, and that's part of it. But it's much more. So I guess the theory of everything is kind of back to human. And this is a concept we have, and it's actually the name of the retreat we're having. But it's also, you can't cheat nature. Right? I think you can't cheat nature is kind of the underlying theory of everything. And if you really think about that, you can solve almost all of life's problems because it's way beyond food. Right?
Well,
so it's way beyond food.
Yeah, there's leverage. For example, we can get on an airplane, go to the other side of the world, or even a bicycle gives you leverage, right?
That's cheating nature in a way.
In a way.
I use that example. The airplane. We couldn't do that before. It's an amazing invention, but it's not cheating the foundational principles of being human.
It's different. I think when you start to get to that level of integration, when it's to do with your own body, then you start to get into trouble because that's where our knowledge starts to run out. There's so many systems within our body. It's a system of systems that and we think, okay, we can understand we think we understand certain systems. And actually, the more we dig into this, we find out that, hey, we really don't know anything about the body. The body is just a magnificent, I don't even want to call it machine. It's just got so much going on that adjusts itself with seasons and circadian rhythms and environmental variables and everything. Like, each individual is different depending on the state that their body's in and whether they even slept last night or not, and what they ate in the morning. You can't really look at it as this mechanistic reductionist view. And in some ways, it's just easier to say, hey, you know what? The best way to manage your body, rather than just understand every detail of it, is to couple to nature and to get back to human and back to becoming whole again. And then how do we do that? That's the path that we're mapping, right?
Yeah, so the back to human, it's okay. There's food, which we talk about a lot, but it's society, it's movement, it's you can figure out what to do if you just use a little logic and just realize that where we came from. So like we said, it not just because we did in the past doesn't make it true, but why are people committing suicide so much? Why is there, we met this woman that's part of this euthanasia thing in Canada, and she's trying to stop all this euthanasia. People are wanting to end their life, not because they're actually terminally ill, but just because they're so lonely.
A lot of it is to do with this idea of consumption will always be able to fill the void, right? And it's a very good idea to have people that feel that there's a void, because that tends towards some sort of compulsive consumption. But it can never be satiated. Only truly whole things can satiate us. If the world offers us all of these hollow things and tells us this is what will solve you, everything from hollow food, hollow medicine, even things like sex and intimacy, for example, replace one with the other. One is actually a whole version, the other one is a proxy for it. Or looking at education for wisdom or knowledge, right? Society has kind of substituted a lot of these things that used to be whole for us with the hollow, and then consuming these things will never make you whole. It's not possible mathematically. Actually, this is your theory too, with the food too.
Well, the food, yeah. To explain this concept of whole versus hollow, this is all, hopefully this makes sense by the end. That we're going to go around in circles and it's all going to come together. So whole versus hollow is best described with the foods, because people can understand this, and most people listening aren't about the processed foods and they switch to whole foods. But whole means so much more than just you're eating a food from nature. It means it's intact, and it has all its attributes. It has all the right ratios, right? Nature needs the right ratios, and something hollow is the opposite. And when you take something out, when you start extracting the different foods and trying to put them back together into a food-like substance, it's never going to work. You cannot be healthy by eating these foods. It's mathematically impossible. So that was the math you're talking about, is that if you eat a sapient diet like we do, you're getting all your nutrients, you're getting your protein, your vitamins, your minerals, and you're getting the right amount of energy, you're getting the right amount of fat and carbs, because it came from nature and everything is in the right proportions. If you try to, say it's 2,800 calories. I hate talking about calories, but say I ate 2,800 calories of these whole foods and I'm good because they're whole and intact. If I tried to eat 2,800 calories of processed foods, it would not work. There's only two options that would happen. I would either force myself to be hungry and starving and eating these processed foods, and I would maybe be able to maintain weight by force, but I would not be getting all my protein and nutrients, right? Because these foods do not have all the protein and nutrients that whole foods have. Or I would overeat these foods to get to that same level of protein and nutrients, and I'd become overweight, right? There's only two options in this equation. Does that make sense? Or maybe you can reiterate that.
Yeah, I'd say that if the food comes with a carrier of energy, right, empty energy, for example, just refined carbohydrate or some sort of oil that's got nothing to it.
So it's potato chips. So it's
potato chips, a great example, right? And then it's devoid of any protein really, or any other micronutrients or any other cofactors that you need. Then what you're going to do is, if you're going to try and absorb the amount of nutrients your body actually needs, this is the real nutrients, the protein, these vitamins, factors. If you're trying to take those in, you're going to have to take a bunch of energy in as well. And this leads to energy toxicity. This means you've just had too much energy for the nutrients that you've taken in. So your body could even be starving of nutrients, but you could be getting fatter because you're just, or destroying your metabolism because you are taking in too much of that substrate that the food comes with. I mean, all of these processed foods, if you go down the middle aisle and have a look at processed foods, it's too much carbohydrate. It's too much just empty fat. There's no, fat-soluble vitamins or anything in these things. And there's just no real nutrient density to it at all. So mathematically, it's not possible. Either you're going to starve yourself and maybe maintain your weight but survive, or you're going to overeat because your body is trying to get those nutrients, and you're going to eat too much energy and put yourself in a bad metabolic state.
So this is great because I just released the podcast with doctors Robbenheimer and Simpson, and they invented the protein leverage hypothesis, which is now not even a hypothesis, it's just what it is. And the best study that explains this, if you didn't listen to the last episode, is that they take two groups of mice, and one group of mice, they give it the correct amount of protein in their rodent chow, and it ate the right amount of food, and it was fine, and everything's good. Then they took the other group, and they diluted down the protein, and then it's the same feed almost. It's just they just added more fats and carbs and less protein. And now the second group had to overeat. They became obese because they overate this food because it was diluted protein. And when they did the measurements, they found that both groups ate the same amount of protein, right? So they saw that all animals eat to get this nutrient.
This is zoopharmacognosy. Humans have it too. As we were saying before, the cows will go and seek out the burdock, the plantain, there's all the different sweet grasses and things, because they'll have all these nutrients that they're trying to balance all these compounds in their body and the protein and so forth, right? And so the mice are doing the same. They're saying, well, the mice is trying to eat for a certain amount of protein that it needs, or for a certain amount of nutrient that it needs. And if it's not getting that target, then it will just keep eating. And if it has a bunch of energy that comes with that ongoing eating, then it's going to get obese. It's actually this is what we call it, being outside of nature, right? It's
decoupling. That's the decoupling, is that you take apart the foods, and then they get in the wrong ratios, and then you're screwed. And this actually can describe what went on in the United States or any Western world and how we became obese. I know there's many other factors like, glyphosate and food additives and all these different things that are bad. But it can be as simple as lowering the protein of the diet with those processed foods, and therefore the entire population has to eat more to get the same amount of protein. They have to eat more.
Protein is expensive. It's energetically expensive. It's a huge amount of energy to produce the ammonia that gets the feedstock so that we can grow that protein. Protein's expensive. Carbohydrates are just a lot cheaper. They come from the sun. That's basically where it comes from, right? So your carbohydrates, you think, come from sun and water, and and that's effectively free, kind of. And it's free compared to where the protein comes from. The protein comes from fixed nitrogen, and we've sped this up. It's very energetically expensive, and so it's expensive economically for us to do so. So foods that are very low in protein, they're very high in carbohydrates, are cheap to produce.
If we shelf life?
Huge shelf life. To dry them out, and nothing will eat them. In fact, even the bacteria don't want to eat these damn things because there's just nothing in them, right?
Yeah. So this is explaining hollow. So I think we're just going with these terms, whole and hollow, and then extending it to all of society, all the modern norms. I kind of blame everything on the modern norm. So let's do society.
What would be the result of a population explosion? That's something else. Because yes, we have enough food, right? So suddenly we can synthetically just jam more protein into the biosphere, the human biosphere, and then you result in a bunch of humans. Well, humans are going to want, all of the things that humans want. Right, everyone's going to want like a little cell phone and some clothing and whatever it is. So what happens is that we have to industrialize the society, and industrialization of society allows us to be more efficient in the production of goods, right, and other sorts of things. And that leads to, let's say, the way that education has to work, because then we say, it's more efficient to have specializations, and then we have a demand for a labor force that is more specialized, and therefore the education will change to serve that, and therefore really, if you like, the Western philosophical mode of thought will change. So really, it's not just that we amplified food, it's that all the minds changed as well, because we had to serve the demand of consumers that emerged. And it's fair enough. People do want a pair of shoes. People do want now these days whiteware and a car and a roof over their head and all the other things that these things are made of, roofing tiles and paint. And it's literally everything you can imagine in modern society, from a pencil to a plastic bottle to a credit card to all of these services. It requires specialization and a hierarchical structure in order to make sure that runs efficiently. We can't just have marauding masses going and killing each other for resources. No, it doesn't work like that, because humans have an ability to organize into communities, and then they have an ability to, I guess we've just discovered what happens when a huge population explosion happens. We've ended up introducing ourselves to the industrial age, right? And yeah, this is the consequence.
Well, so this is the unintended consequence. So no one's saying it's a bad thing or it was wrong that we invented all these technologies and we exploded, but now we're having these repercussions. That's why I mentioned the suicide and all these problems and loneliness and problems that come from this. So it's more like we just need to realize this exists, examine it, know how it happened, and then realize that it happened. And how do we, it happened because humans love to innovate, right? And we're always thinking like this.
Well, think about they have the story in management which says that someone will rise to the level of their competence. Mm-hmm. Actually, humans will rise to the level of their misery that they will take, mm-hmm. right? And then no more, right? Oh. That's a kind of a limiting factor. And so what ends up happening is that we will tolerate a certain amount of misery. We will, for example, eat survival foods because they're cheaper. If we don't know that, if we think food A is expensive, food B is cheap, and I can go further on food B as a survival food, we tend to go towards that unless are being foregone. And one of those big other things is our health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, but then talk about the society and the hollow, because we've had this population boom, and we didn't know that if we all live in these cities, it seems efficient, right? It seems like it's this great thing, but what are the unintended consequences of that?
Well, it's very, very complex hierarchies as well that end up tending to form. And I think we discussed this a bit earlier today. There is an establishment of sorts, or if you like, there is a societal structure that's in place. And depending on where people are or various opportunities that they've had, they take positions in this society, right? It could be anyone from, and I'm not saying one is better than the other. You could have a window cleaner, and you could have somebody who's managing the budget of a company that pays window cleaners, right? One person, that person there who's managing that company, is going to have somewhat power over the person who is the window cleaner and subject to the budget, right? These are just these hierarchies that are set up. And what you find is that when people are in a position of power, they kind of tend to serve themselves. There's a bit of selfishness in the whole human nature side of things. And so therefore power tends to kind of concentrate up the top, right? And what serves the master does not usually serve the servant. That's the way things tend to go.
Yeah, well, now we've zoomed out to why we're in the situation we are. And what people ask me, why are all the government recommendations so wrong for food? Or why does the sick care system work this way? Well, the answer to all of these is kind of what you're alluding to, is that what serves the top does not serve the individual. What serves the structure. And this started with the pharaohs and the slaves, thousands and thousands of years ago, is that it's like the CEO of a company. What's good for her or him would be very different from what's good for the janitor.
Yes, or the individual. Actually, I like this. It's what serves the structure doesn't usually serve the individual. The individual has to be very intentional about seeking out what serves them, right? Otherwise, what's going to happen is they get lost in the system. And we find that, food recommendations, particular ways of implementing healthcare, other sorts, all of these things, they're a cost center, right? For governments, for large corporations. If they're a cost center, then they're going to try and make these things more efficient. And what that means is costs are cut, right? Corners are cut, and it doesn't end up in serving the individual usually. The individual really does need to go and fight for that thriving for themselves.
Well, you take a look at the food pyramid or my plate or whatever we call it. So originally, when I was doing research for Food Lies, we found out that they actually had to make a different sort of recommendation because they realized they were going to have to pay for this food. If they said if all meat and dairy and whole foods were good, now all of a sudden they have to pay for all of the military, the nursing homes,
funny enough,
the food stamps.
It's the most expensive food.
It's the most expensive food,
right?
So then they were like, wait a second, we can't. I mean, we have the SNAP, or it's called SNAP. It's a food stamp thing. We have to pay for these low-income people to have food. We can't afford them to feed them the healthy foods. So that influenced the dietary guidelines. It's like, well, we have millions and millions of acres of corn, wheat, and soy. We can subsidize this. This is very cheap. They thought they were like, oh, calories a calorie, totally bogus, and we can talk about that later. And so if all calories are the same, then why not just give them a whole bunch of bread and just cheap processed foods, because they're just calories? Fine. Well, it completely backfires. It caused the entire obesity and chronic disease epidemic, and it's because of the structure of the government way up here. So what's good for them is, okay, we need to put out recommendations. We can't, worry about every single person. We need to do something that's going to work for our budget, that's going to just make everyone fall into line.
Almost like the survival mentality. How much can you trim down to have this survive for the lowest amount of money? Something like that.
Yeah, and so then what it turns out is that for the individual person, it doesn't work. And so all the people that fix their health, all the people in our community, they pretty much do the opposite of the recommendations. And that's why it's so funny, is they always ask, like, how did they get every single thing wrong? And I'm saying, it's not an accident, and it's not some weird thing, and it's not even evil. It's just that, no, it's not evil. It's just that this is just, it's so everything is so opposite, because what's good for you is not good for them. So that's why everything has to be opposite.
Yeah, I don't look at it as being evil at all. I think people get wound up about, like, how the establishment and there's elites and there's this whole structure. It's actually all of us. We are in that one society. We're in that structure. It's humanity and human nature that got us here. Our drives, our will, our motivations, our needs, our desires. That's what built it. It's not like, oh, the elites constructed this whole thing. No, the elites are just you and me. It's just everyone has got the motivations based on their position that they got into. And if you were there, if you were, like, let's say, somewhere where you had that control, you'd probably do the same thing. And people say, oh, no, I wouldn't. But if you really, really think about it, it's human nature.
It is. This is a little tough pill to swallow too, but everyone wants to be the boss, right? Like,
well, at least like to do what they would like, right? Make their own decisions, right?
Control their own destiny. Like, if you gave a decision of, like, would you rather be in charge? Well, some people just don't like to be in charge, but you want to be the decision maker. You want to make the rules instead of being forced to show up at 6 a.m. You'd rather be someone saying, well, why don't you show up at 6 a.m. and I'll roll in when I want. Everyone wants to have that freedom. And so that's kind of what you're saying, is that it just rises all the way to the top.
It does. I like to say, like, oh, we've found the enemy. It is us. This is a deeper conversation to be had, but, like, if we consider that we're responsible for the state of affairs, then we can do something about it. That's the other thing too. If you say, oh, well, we have this nebulous establishment and there's these elites and people on special islands that have billions of dollars. Okay, there are people who are wealthy. There are people who have control in different ways that we do. But they also have their problems. You'll find that they have bigger, different problems to what you have, but they're not like, it's not like that's the reason why everything's terrible. No, because if you do that, then you're kind of giving away your control. You're giving away the responsibility. You're not saying, okay, you know what? I can be quite a bit responsible for the way that I respond to the world. I can be responsible for doing something that takes my life to a better place. If you just think that you have to blame the establishment or something and the elites and there's nothing you can do about it, and you become a victim, and that sort of victim thinking is not going to take you into a place of human thriving. I think me and you are both kind of on the same page with this, right?
Well, yeah. No, I like the radical ownership and responsibility.
Yes.
But tell me more about this is us. Like, it is us. Like, because I don't think a lot of people understand that, and I might not even understand that.
Within every domain, within every job, any community, everything, there are people who are, like, different. Let's say there are people who could be psychopaths, right? There are people who have got a lot of altruism naturally. There are people who are, let's say, very giving and generous, and there are people who are selfish. It's not just like the guys at the top, the men and women, whoever at the top, are the ones that are terribly selfish and everyone else is wonderful. No, across the entirety of all of society, you're going to find a balance of every kind of type of person. So the idea that it is us, it's also radical responsibility in saying, look, we are responsible for the state of affairs, it's also a way of taking back control. It's saying, look, I can do something about it because in some ways I've got that responsibility. And it's a recognition that, you know what, we're in this together as a society. And if you were there's no separation in some ways. If you were that person who was at the top, if you were that decision maker, if you just happened to be there, had that education, had that family, had that opportunity to get into that position, had all those environmental variables around you were the same, you would probably act the same way as those people do as well.
I've used the Coca-Cola CEO as an example. It's I don't know if it's a man or woman, but I mean, this person doesn't have a problem sleeping at night. He thinks, I make this awesome product that is delicious and helps people have a fun
have
birthday,
a great time.
Or it's like all the commercials are them having fun and drinking Coke. So he's just like, well, it's your fault for drinking too much of it, but I make a great product and he's fine.
Oh, and on top of that, they say, oh, well, actually, we've actually put a lot of budget and millions of dollars into this nutritional council.
Oh, yeah, the Energy Balance Consortium.
Right, there you go.
Oh, it just means you need to just exercise more, yeah.
Yeah, exercise more and you'll be fine. And those guys, they're going on science, let's say, that has been done on their behalf to try and get some insight coming in. And so they're being exposed to those sorts of influences as well that suit their own needs. And there's this song from Simon and Garfunkel called The Boxer, right? And I love this one line. It really got me. It just says, a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest, right? If you are in a job and that job is paying for your mortgage, for your car payments, for your kids' education, your food, your holidays and everything, you have selective hearing. It's just the way it works, right? You don't want to have to go and find another job or do something completely different. You convince yourself that what you're doing is good and it's part of the way that the world works and you're doing your bit.
Well, yeah, so it's just, so to me, it is us just means that human nature is kind of just universal. Yes, of course, there are like, I don't know, what is it, like 1% are psychopaths or something.
There's such a spectrum of people, it's unbelievable.
Yeah,
but what we can say
general.
In general, it's not like just the psychopaths are at the top and everybody else is, or something, whatever you think the top is. Yeah, no, it's
yes. So generally, it's human nature, and then I like it because it gives you more control because you're not playing the victim. You're saying, okay, well, what can I do? Like, we got in this situation. We have the Haber-Bosch process, and we have, millions of tons of these processed foods now.
Well, here comes AI, right? Here comes for our jobs.
But yeah, so it's like, what can we do about it? What can I do about it as an individual? And that's why I was talking about our community or people who just can reject the modern norms. So we talk about the way out, and it's not like an anarchist thing. It's not like let's take down the government. It's kind of like let's have a parallel society.
It's like take it back.
Take it back.
Yeah, let's take it back, because at the end of the day, it all belongs to us. And so if you like, establishment is us, but we just want things to work in a ways where people can be thriving, can be happy. We can solve some of these issues that cause people suffering that's not necessary. I've got a belief that, look, if you can resolve, this happened for me, and we didn't talk about this earlier, but I have had my own health journey. I had some very serious...
Yeah, do your health journey.
Yeah, I had some very serious health conditions, and I'll talk about that in just 2 seconds. But what I wanted to say is, if we can recognize that it's us that is responsible for our response to the world, right? So if something's happened, you're in a certain situation, it is you that has the agency to move yourself to respond to whatever it is. That is what leads to thriving, because you can be intentional about your response. Now, awareness is a huge part of that, and that's what me and you are really passionate about. Getting the awareness out, trying to switch people on to perhaps what the pathway might be, redirecting which way the compass should point to navigate your way out of this. And that's what the Sapien movement's about. Now, my own experience of that was when I was a vegetarian. I met Mary, who you've had in your podcast a few times, did this huge tour together with over 180 cities and going and exploring these traditional communities and so forth. But what I didn't mention before is that she gave me the insight, or readjusted my compass to showing me which way it was to true health. And so I had, just to list a few things, I had psoriasis, it was psoriatic eczema from age of 14 in very sensitive areas. It was terrible. I've seen the dermatologists or GPs, they prescribed me hydrocortisone and all these topical steroids, which by the way are god awful, and I know now what the consequences are of those things. Clotrimazole or miconazole, these kind of antifungals. I got told that it was a chronic fungal infection. It was incurable. Who knows what? And so from the age of 14 until the age of 40, I had ulcerative colitis. I had chronic fatigue for the last few years. And then, what else? Nail fungus. I was really a wreck, right? Mm-hmm. My cousin called me a fat skeleton once. So it was a kind of a description, but I had no energy. I had ectopic beats, which I panicked about. I didn't know what to do, but my heart would just, skip beats and double beats. Now, that's when I met Mary. And through I guess you could call it just pure functional nutritional medicine with an alignment of how I thought about the world. That was basically how it worked. And with zero medicine and zero supplements, I resolved every single one of those conditions. It's almost like a religious experience. I can tell you, it's not instant. Firstly, I didn't believe it. I thought it was the craziest thing ever to think that meat or animal products are going to be taking me out of this health crisis. And actually, I didn't even realize that I had a health crisis. It was just things I had that I had to put creams on and fix and deal with occasionally. It was unbelievable. She basically saw my fingernail one day and said, "Oh, you have psoriasis. This is a psoriatic fingernail." And I was just so out of it. I just said, "Oh, no, I've been to the doctor. It's not. Thank you." Mm-hmm. And we went on with our lives. Mm-hmm. And 3 weeks later, I looked on Google. I typed psoriasis fingernail, clicked on images, and there was my fingernail. Mm-hmm. And then I got the chills. I was like, it's a thing. No one had told me this. No doctor had actually told me that this was an autoimmune condition. I actually I'd heard that word autoimmune, and I disregarded it. I thought, that sounds kind of kooky. Like systemic inflammation, I had the same feeling about that. I was like, this is one of these things, that who knows? It's just, they just invented these terms. And then I looked up autoimmune. What does that mean? And I'm like, oh my goodness, it's not great. So I did ask Mary, I said, what do I do? And then she's dying to tell me, of course. I was the boyfriend, not the patient at the time, dying to tell me what to do. And she's like, okay, we're going to cut all the grains and we're going to stop eating tomatoes and all these nightshades. Mm-hmm. And let's just see what happens. No more beans, no more legumes, a few of these other foods, no more unripe vegetables. Just a bunch of interesting principles, which now I understand them, right? Mm-hmm. And within a month and a half, I had the steepest decline in my psoriasis, because it was very raised bumps, terrible. They used to bleed at night. And a month and a half in, I thought, okay, my flare-up's going down. And then that was when we went to see a family who put some regenerative beef in front of me. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, I'm going to try eating this and just see what happens. And as soon as I started eating it, I got waves of pleasure going down my neck. I was just unbelievable. I hadn't put a mouthful of meat in my mouth for years, and 2.5 years, something like this. And I started eating it. I just got these waves of pleasure. And then I became this I just stuck to the diet like crazy. Just meat, nothing else, some broths, some simple stuff like that. No fruit, actually. She cut that away. And within 3 months, and I've never had this my entire life, within 3 months, all of my psoriasis had gone. I thought I would have scars, everything gone completely. And I had this epiphany, right? I was like, I was lied to, or someone didn't know what to tell me. But it really stirred me up. Within 9 months, I had my ectopics gone. 6 months in, all my nail fungus disappeared. That was a really crazy thing as well. I won't go into it, but yeah, all the nail fungus. Then I had my UC resolved itself within that time as well. And then I had no dandruff, and then the next year I got no allergies. By that time, we're starting to tour the world, and I thought, right, this is it. I've just got to study this now. What the hell happened? So yeah, it was amazing. And then we met, of course.
Yeah, I mean, so many people have these stories, and it sounds unbelievable. If you tell the normal doctors, they laugh at you. I remember my story. I went to the dermatologist many, many years ago, and I had all these skin issues. I actually had terrible issues from drinking kale and spinach and almond milk every day.
The oxalate thing.
Yeah. So, and then I told her, I think it has something to do with what I'm eating. And this lady was like, what are you talking about? She's like, what? She laughed me out of the office. It was so traumatizing.
But they don't know that.
It was this gaslighting thing. But I don't know if it's considered gaslighting because she didn't know what she was talking about.
They don't know. They're just innocent. They don't know. They don't teach them that. I actually had a cardiologist. I was wired up to a Holter machine because I had such serious ectopics. They thought they were going to have atrial fibrillation. They have this thing that lets you see every heartbeat and everything. I had 20,000 of these every few days. And so I have all this data as well. And then 2 years later, when I'd resolved it absolutely completely, not a single ectopic, I went back to see him because I got a bit worried. I was eating so much butter that I thought, oh gosh, I better go see the guy and have him ultrasound my heart and, see what's going on. And he kept me there for 2 hours. He didn't know, because he was going to prescribe me beta blockers. He prescribed me some magnesium to try and do something. Nothing worked, right? He had no clue. And then he's like, what did you do? And I said, I stopped eating tomatoes and I ate a stick of butter a day. He was shocked. He's like, very dangerous. He's a Greek guy. Very, very dangerous. Very dangerous. You know, and I'm looking at him. I think, you know what? He's younger than me. He's round, right? He's got white hair and he doesn't look healthy. So I'm like, I'm good, right?
Oh, man.
They just don't know.
They just don't know. Yeah. Well, you know what? We need to wrap up episode 1. We're going to do a 2-parter on this. So we have so much more to get into. We got to hear about the rest of the travels around the world. We have so much. We have the Sapien movement, which is actually pretty huge.